Welcome to Knowledgeable Aging. I'm your host, Jason Kotar. Joining us today to talk about end of life is Dr. Dan Morheim. Dr. Morheim brings a unique perspective: physician, state legislator, academic, author, and consultant. As an emergency medicine physician, he's been on the front lines of healthcare for over 40 years. He's the author of 2 books, the most recent one in 2020 called Preparing for a Better End. How are you doing today, Dr. Morheim?
Good morning and good to be with everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are, and thanks for attending this topic. You have to be brave to come to a topic about end of life care, but it's important, and this is going to be the upbeat, empowered view, if I can carry that off.
Very good. Well, before we get started, Dr. Morheim, for those that are joining us for the live webinar, if you have any questions, type your questions in. There's a control panel on your right-hand side. Time permitting, we will do everything in our power to get your questions answered. If we don't, Dr. Morheim will have his contact information. You can reach out to him directly or us at Knowledgeable Aging. So Dr. Morheim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to slides now, and please confirm that you can see them.
Yep.
So that's that part. Let me see here. So this is what I'm going to talk about. There's a little bit more of my background: emergency physician, state legislator, Hopkins faculty. And this is the book that I just wrote, endorsed by a lot of famous people like Maya Angelou, Senator Ben Cardin, Dr. Leanna Wen, who you see on TV. And a lot of the issues that I'll talk about are all covered in this book. In 30 minutes, you can't cover all there is about end of life care and planning. But it's really, in this issue, it's not a question of if, but when and how. We are the first generation in human history that likely has some say about how we die. And this is about empowerment and values. I know it's a tough topic, but we're going to deal with it. And we can put our heads in the sand, or we can step up and say, hey, I can take some control of this. And actually, in the United States, it's free legal forms that are readily available. But I'm not going to read the slides, so you can read them for yourself. But these are interesting questions. But number 4 there, I want you to take 5 seconds to think about. When the end comes, where would you like to be? Who's around you? What's going on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I bet most of us said at home with our friends and family and loved ones around, pain-free, comfortable, in a holistic, supportive environment. Nobody says killed in a fiery car crash. Nobody says shot in a drive-by. Nobody says dying of a untreatable disease long past any hope of recovery in an intensive care unit in a hospital. Now, I want the best of, with our family down the hall, all of us tied to tubes and monitors. I want the best that modern medical science has to offer, but also there comes a time when it's not servicing. So I got involved in this because as an ER doctor, I found myself at times having to make decisions about patients' lives, and I wish I had known what it is they wanted. And so we got to accept this reality, and we all kind of go along with this William Soroyan quote. We think there'll be exception made for us, but in reality, there isn't. So this is me as an ER doctor. I did 40 plus years of day shifts, night shifts, weekends, and holidays in large suburban hospital emergency rooms, trauma center for the last 20 years, also worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait after Gulf War I, helping the Americans putting out the oil fires, volunteered at a homeless clinic for 3 years and serving on its board. And so pretty much a lot of frontline experience is what informed my perspective on all these issues. And I found myself very often having to do procedures on patients. This is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You've seen it on TV where they have a 90% plus success rate. In real life, it's more like 1 or 2%. I'm the one that would do these procedures. I used to say we would do these things to people, but actually, in fact, it was me. I was doing them. I was putting the tubes in the windpipe, and I was putting in what we call central lines when persons, we had to put a needle in to draw blood or give medicines, and if they didn't have good veins, I would put a central line, which involves putting a big needle in the jugular vein, the subclavian vein in the chest, or femoral vein in the leg. Now, emergency medicine is a fascinating field, and it's become, a little bit of a change. I would say COVID has made ER people heroes, and I think we really are. I think that's been the way it's been for a long time, although nobody on their to-do list in the morning when they get up puts go to the emergency room on it. So every visit we have is unexpected, it's unpredictable, people are understandably stressed and anxious. all the more reason to get everything that you can in advance out of the way when you're cool and calm and collected. Of course, I did find myself part of a big system, and you know, there's always rules and parameters, federal, state, insurance companies, and so on, and I had to deal with that. But here's my one main piece of advice about if you have to go to the emergency room. Patients come in, sometimes we don't know who they are. We have protocols to go through wallets and purses and try to identify them. All made worse now because of the COVID pandemic when families aren't allowed at the bedside. So put this little list together and staple it. That's what I have at my house, right by the front door. Because as an ER doctor, what I often had to do was go scurrying around trying to figure out who this person is, and the staff would too. What are some of their issues? These are the things we need to know in order to treat you right away. Even with all the databases and going online, patients in the hospital, even where I've taken care of, we didn't have all the information we wanted. So put this together, please. Well, in early 1990s, I started getting involved in some community activities and ended up running for office and got elected to the Maryland House of Delegates. We have 4-year terms in Maryland, and I got elected 6 times. And as I started to work on these issues, and this was my last major bill in the Maryland General Assembly. You can see all those green dots up there. That was passing unanimously. I worked in a very bipartisan way. I'm a Democrat, but I worked closely with everybody on all the issues. It wasn't easy going out in the community, and people would say, Delegate Morhaim, what are you working on? And I would say, well, all the various issues that, you know, schools, education, taxes, but I also want to talk about end-of-life care, your death, the death of everybody you know, the death of your loved ones. And oh, by the way, don't forget to vote for me in the next election. And people sometimes thought I was nuts to bring up this issue, but what I found was that folks really appreciated that someone was talking about it. And people would often come up to me and say, you know, Delegate Morhaim, Dr. Morhaim, I'm dealing with this in my own family, and you've made it possible for me to talk about this. And it makes me think of folks like Betty Ford, who brought up breast cancer, or people who talk about family members with ADD or substance abuse or Alzheimer's. You know, we ought to start having this discussion. It's a taboo topic, but there's no reason that it should be. We're all going to get there. And so, but we can open our eyes and deal with this better. Because here's one of the realities. Most of us will have time to consider these issues. And it used to be that people died at 65 or 70. You know, I remember an old TV show I was watching, and they said, let's get the old timer out here. And so this guy comes out, I'm Gramps, I'm 61 years old. Gee, 61, that's like in my rearview mirror now. People are fortunately living longer, happier, better, more productive lives, and routinely living to 80s, 90s, 100-year-olds, and doing well. And so the question is, can we step up and do some routine advanced care planning? Well, in the legislature, we dealt with a lot of issues, and I asked one of my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, I'd say, you know, how many people have completed advanced directives, living will, medical power of attorneys, which is a topic I'm going to get into. So if you've completed yours, great, but think about time to update. If you haven't completed it, done it. In any case, I want you to start thinking about, as I go through this, these are the arguments I'm going to make to you, that you can start bringing this up to other people, because we have got to talk about this. Bring it up to your children, your adult children, friends, families, neighbors. And a lot of you are going to think are weird, but nonetheless. So, you know, even though I brought this up politically, and politicians like to be at happy things like groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, I kept getting reelected because people appreciated that I was willing to talk about a serious topic. So I asked my colleague at Hopkins, how many people have completed advanced directives? That seemed like a simple public health 101 question, because I can look up how many people have psoriasis or kidney cancer or sickle cell disease or whatever. And what we found is that nobody had done that subject. Done that research. The taboo of talking about this subject was so profound that no one had done the research. So I went out and I got a grant and we did the research. Now I don't expect you to read this slide or the next one, but I want to show you that we did peer-reviewed published papers with bar graphs and statistical analysis and all that. And I will tell you what we found. We found that only about 40% of Americans had completed advanced directives. Free legal forms have been around since 1991. And It was about half that in the minority population. So we identified this as a minority health disparity. But even among people over 60, 65, not even half had completed advance directives. Maybe it's a little better now, but not much. Those statistics haven't changed. Now, since about 40% had completed advance directives, 40% of us, that meant 60% had not. So in our study, we asked people, would you like to complete an advance directive, and explain what it is? And overwhelmingly, over 80, 90% said they would. So 90% of 60% is over 50%. So I knew that Americans wanted to have this information and knowledge. And we also asked them, where would you like to get it from? We gave them a variety of choices, and overwhelmingly they said they want to talk to their physician and their clinician about this, as well as others, but that was the overwhelming group. So I decided that if so many people wanted this, it affects all of us, 100% of us are in this category, I'm going to go out on a crusade and try to get people to start completing advance directives. So let's talk about what that actually is. And many of you are familiar with this, but I'm going to run through it anyways. It's a 3-part document. And this is the first part, choosing someone to make decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself. Now, typically that's going to be a spouse. It could be an adult child. You can designate different categories. I'll tell you what mine says candidly. My wife is first. I have 3 adult children. They're all really good people, but 2, we just get along better. So I have, if my wife's not available, the 2 children can involve the 3rd, but if there's a tough decision, the 2 will make it. And also ask them to call my best friend from medical school who knows me and who's medical judgment. He wouldn't be involved in the decision making, but if there's a tough decision, I want him to be asked as well. That's mine, but you can choose yours. Now, in the absence of choosing, this chaos ensues and all kinds of problems, and who's deciding what for whom becomes a real issue. This is the second part of the advance directive. So first you have to choose, but then after you choose, what kind of care do you want to dictate to that person or suggest to that person that you want? You have to have a conversation with that person. And so there's several choices here. And I like this new term, allow natural death, not CPR or not no CPR. I never liked DNR, do not resuscitate, those terms, because it felt like I was withholding something and I couldn't always tell what is resuscitation or could cardiopulmonary resuscitation work. I'd rather those decisions have been made from a clinical perspective. So this is a situation I found you don't want to be the person that they're talking about in this memo here at this conference, but that's in fact what's happening every hour and every day in every hospital in the United States. Someone comes in, there's a person in trouble, and we're all trying to figure out what action to take. Who do we call? And when someone comes in, we start making phone calls, and you may get that call, grandpa's in the emergency room, or maybe a young person. You never know. So you have to make some of these decisions, and they're tough decisions, and you need to think them through, but they're not that hard when you go through the forms. So let's look at this. There's the full court press. You get everything. And there's times when this is appropriate. If you're a young person, you don't have any other problems, yeah, you ought to be going for pretty much a recovery. There are clinical conditions like people who have drownings in cold water where there's a real good chance of resuscitation. That's different. It's a lot different than the other end of the spectrum. Just to paint the picture, a 99-year-old nursing home patient who's been diagnosed with serious dementia for the last 10 years, is in diapers, and all their hygiene issues are managed for them. It may not be appropriate to have this as the decision for that. But again, in that situation, it's up to you. Then on the other end of the spectrum is this, and that may be exactly where you want to go. Let me say a couple of words about hospice and palliative care. The thing I hear about, the most common comment I hear about hospice care is, I wish I'd called hospice sooner. You're entitled to 6 months of hospice care. It's covered by Medicare. The average length of stay in the United States is 2 weeks. So we're just not getting to people sooner. Think of it this way. You've bought 6 months of it and you're only using 2 weeks. Think if that was a vacation home, that would be wasteful. Call hospice early when you're well. Don't wait till the end, or at least at the beginning of any serious illness. And let me say about palliative care, which is supportive care, not always end of life. There's a famous study in the New England Journal of Medicine. They took 2 groups of people with identical lung cancers. Half got early palliative care, the other did not, but they got identical treatments. So the only difference was palliative care. And clinicians, unfortunately, too often have had the idea, well, we don't know what to do with this patient anymore, so let's call palliative care in, the palliative care specialists. They come in late. But when they came in early, here's what happened. The people who got early palliative care, remember, these people got identical treatments. Early palliative care, lived longer, had a better quality of life, spent less money. That's a pretty good trifecta. Lived longer, better quality of life, and spent less money. So get involved in these things early. Very hard to make medical decisions anyways. So the more you get out of the way in advance, that's what to do. The middle path, well, you sort of have one extreme and the other. There's always the middle path. And this is what mine says. And you can put additional things in your advance directive. Obviously, mine says if I'm going pretty well, keep me going. But if no extraordinary care, something comes up. But mine, you can put other things in your advance directive. For example, mine says I want control of the remote. Mine says take me outdoors as much as possible. And if I can't be outdoors, at least put me near a window where I can look at the outdoors. Mine says I'd like a bite of chocolate every day. You can also actually control some of your visitors. You can say, these are people I'd really like to see me. But maybe you have an annoying relative in your family that takes over conversations and runs their mouth. You could say, please don't let that person around when you're making medical decisions about me, or I don't want them in to visit me. You can actually do those things. And so you can put more and more stuff in your advanced directive than you might imagine. So there are situations that are always difficult and never going to be solved. This is all about shifting likelihoods from difficulties and not knowing what to do, procedures being done that you don't want, and so on and so forth, to shifting it to more what your values and care is appropriate for you. But dementia, Alzheimer's is one of the harder things. The only thing I can really say here is that if you're sensing those issues, get evaluated. Not all people with that are called Alzheimer's have Alzheimer's, which is a specific medical diagnosis. Some diagnoses of dementia are treatable and diagnosable, so you want to be sure you do that and have the discussion about end-of-life care while the person is still competent, as Ronald Reagan did. And in my book, I quote his entire note. Candidly, I wasn't a Ronald Reagan political fan that much, but I sure admire him for having taken that step. So in our society, I should also say it's not just for old people. The three most famous cases in medical legal history are these. And as an ER doctor, older people, when the path ahead definitely appears to be shorter than the path behind, usually have made some of these decisions. Not enough are well documented in forms as they should be, but they've made some of these decisions. But young people tend to get in trouble catastrophically. And so you're really helpful to know what they would have wanted. And I had a friend whose son was in a terrible accident with an isolated head injury, but he had designated organ donation and some other aspects of his care, even though he was only in his early 20s. And it made a huge difference for the family, despite the horrible tragedy of the experience. So our culture, we value individual rights and autonomy. Yet in this area, for some reason, we collectively abdicate. We just don't think it through. And that's really counter to what most of us believe. There are now things called wrongful life lawsuits, actually. I hope you don't get involved with that. I don't like being sued as a doctor, but this is a reality. So typical thing is wrongful death, but this is when procedures are done on people that didn't want them. So we're going to have to learn on that. Now, if those other issues didn't persuade you, let me just move to the money issue. Because money, you can't talk about healthcare without talking about money. And this is how much money we spend in our lives. And a number of different ways to look at it, but something like 25 or 30% of the healthcare dollars we spend in our life are spent in the last months of life. Medicare, which is $900 billion, $300 billion is pretty much towards end of life care. If people completed advanced directives, most of us would choose a middle path. Most of us would end up therefore not dying in a hospital intensive care unit or a hospital. We might die at home hospice or in a hospice facility. It just shifts it. If you want the full court press, you can get it, but most of us don't choose that. So actually, estimates are that we could save 10 or 15% of that $300 billion. How do we usually save money in healthcare? We do it by creating a system that no one understands. We shift burdens to taxpayers and employers. We shift burdens to employees who have more co-pays and deductibles. Here's a way, by respecting people's rights and values, if we would just complete the forms, we could save a lot of money the right way. So here's another way of looking at how much money we spend on end-of-life care and per capita spending. So a few people spend a lot of money, and we can deal with this in a much more creative, better, holistic, personal-centered, respect for individual values way. And I run in charity races. I ran in one on Sunday 2 days ago, and this is another way we raise money for healthcare. We ought to just be doing it. So the third part by the way, here's where you can get advanced directive forms. I personally like my directives. It's free, it's online, it walks you through the process. Simple sign in, usual thing, name, password, you're in. And then they actually send you reminders of the time to update. Really, really the best one, and you'll see in a minute how portabilize it. ARP is another excellent source, and personal medical electronic health record links are there. And those are really excellent as well, and they're free too. So my directives you can turn into a QR code. I carry this with me in the trunk of my car, in the glove compartment of my car, sorry, and in my wallet. So if I get to the emergency room, they can scan this and get all the information they need, my medical history, who to contact, all kinds of things. So the staff will know me and what to do. So the last part, I'll touch on very quickly, is organ donation, disposition of the body, and some of the choices involved there. So this is also important, and I would make a strong case for organ donation. I revamped the Maryland organ donation laws in 2008, and that sparked a huge surge in transplantation at Johns Hopkins and at the University of Maryland. But I remember the hearing for that. There were people who came who talked about the loved one they lost, but they had comfort in that that person had donated organs and tissues to help other people live. And there were other people who testified for the bill who said, I'm alive now because somebody donated an organ. And it was very moving testimony, and especially moving were a couple of cases where the relative of the donor who had donated a heart, that heart was beating in the person sitting next to them. It was really profound. And so I was very proud that I revamped our organ donation laws. So I would urge everybody to consider full organ donation. You can also donate your body to medical science, which is the least expensive way. Now, this is a conventional cemetery that we've all driven by or familiar with, but you ought to know how much resource we put in the ground there, a tremendous amount of resource. So I'm not a fan of these, and you can get carried away with burials, as sometimes happens in human history. So we can put a lot of resource into the ground or above ground in this case. But some folks think cremation is the way to go. I would argue that cremation is not the way to go. It has a huge carbon footprint. It releases a lot of particulate matter, which is toxic to folks downwind from that smokestack or anywhere near. And it just really burns not only the person, but the casket, as you can see, and a lot of negative byproducts. So what's coming around now is our natural or green burials, pretty much the way we kind of think of it traditionally in the United States in years past. Somebody would die, they'd be in the parlor of the house, people come by and pay their respects, and they'd be buried in the family graveyard in the back. And this is just a lot more environmentally sensitive. It's what my advanced directive says. I don't want to spend money putting me in an expensive casket into the ground, is what I would prefer. And it also preserves the land in the area. And this is what actually a natural burial site. And you walk through it, and I find this my mother-in-law is buried in one of these, and I find it much more comforting when my wife and I go and reflect on her life and how much she meant to us. And there's a simple flat river stone. So we're all aware that this is going to happen. And so we could spend a few minutes at any time and just take care of some of this paperwork to get it out of the way. But this is the human condition, and there's no getting around it. Now, I can't cover every other aspect of advanced directives. I'd like to go and end of life care. These are all covered in the book. But I want to touch on one down there at the very bottom, La Crosse, Wisconsin, where that community with its some activists, its faith community, business community, legal community, just citizens, its healthcare system, they decided they would be the town that has the conversation. And they have a 98% rate of completion advance directive among adults, that is over the age of 18, people over the age of 18. And what they found was that it brought the community together in ways they could not anticipate. Families were more comfortable and content with the end of life care experiences, more holistic, and they saved a lot of money. All these other issues, what people fear the most are pain, isolation, and dependency. Pain, isolation, and dependency. Pain can be managed, isolation can be managed, and dependency, hospice and palliative care are really good at helping families manage that, getting respite care, and so forth. It's interesting what doctors want for themselves, both from candid conversations I've had with colleagues, but also from studies. We doctors too often are doing things to patients that we would not want for ourselves. And so that's an inconsistency that really troubles me. But these are all topics covered in the book, and there are a lot of other things in there that I hope you find helpful. My book is really designed to be a practical guide. So what's your role? First of all, personal responsibility. Only you can complete your advance directive. You can't palm this off on anybody else. Look in the mirror. That's the person that's going to take care of this for you. And it makes you think about your own values and what's important and who do you trust and what do you really think. It's a good experience. It only takes 10 minutes to fill out the forms, but it may take a little time for you to reflect on all of this. And you can change your advance directive at any time. The latest one is the one that's most operative, is the one that's to be respected. So someone has to break the conversation, break into the conversation, break the ice and start the conversation. I hope that becomes you. Now, let me tell you a story that changed my life on the subject. I was working an ER shift, 4 to midnight, and got a call. An elderly woman living alone, which is a common demographic, was found. And when from the paramedics call, it was pretty clear that she'd had a major neurological catastrophe, a stroke of some kind. And sure enough, when she came to the emergency room, it was obvious. Now, I initiated the big workup, and we got CAT scans and consultations and blood tests, and she had on her CAT scan a major intracranial bleeding inside the brain from which there was no recovery. At the same time, and simultaneous over this 3, 4, 5-hour exercise, we're calling out to her family, and they're beginning to come in dribs and drabs, and I'm keeping them informed as I shuttle back and forth. But what I see with the family is they're getting into fights and arguments about all these issues. And they're tearful, and sometimes when families get together, even on happy occasions, let alone stressful ones like this, old wounds and hurts begin to come up. And the people that knew her best said, "Doc, let grandma die in peace." And the people who knew her least and came more remotely said, "Doc, do everything for her." Well, this was quite a conflict. And so finally, when everything was done, it turned out she had completed an advance directive. And I got it and it said no heroic efforts. So I went back in the room, and there a lot of all hell is breaking loose, but finally everybody quiets down, time for the doctor to say something. And I said, it's very clear, no heroic efforts. So I'm going to go in the room and I'm going to disconnect the tubes, and we'll let nature take its course. And you might think at that point, with all this conflict, things would get worse. Actually, everybody calmed down. It was like the burden had been lifted off their shoulders. And they came together. I took them into the room with me. I disconnected everything, and I watched them. They went to the head of the bed, stroked her brow, said some prayers or sang some songs. And I drifted to the back of the room and watched. And I thought, and reflected over this the next few days, this woman gave her family a gift. Because when advance directives become operative, if you're awake and alert, you're making your own medical decisions. It's when you can't that this comes up. And so she took care of her family. If we truly say we love the people, if we truly love the people we say we love, we'll take care of this, because we're a me-oriented culture, but this ultimately isn't about me. It's about taking care of the people around you. So keep that in mind. This is the book that I wrote, and you can see the endorsements and the usual sources for how to get a book online are all available. It's available in electronic format as well. And there's Johns Hopkins Press. There's that little code. You can get a discount. So a challenging topic. I appreciate your listening. And if you have any questions or you'd like to send them to me. Here's my email, or I'm available for presentations and discussions. And I thank you very much. And Jason Kotar and Knowledgeable Aging, thank you. I know it's a challenging topic, but I hope you appreciate that there's better ways to deal with them than the ways most of us are, and we ought to take advantage of those. Thank you very much. Jason, back to you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Dan. Before we get to, if you have a couple minutes, Dan, we have a couple questions.
Sure.
Your email, can you spell out your email for individuals that will be listening on our podcast too, please, Dan?
Sure. danmorheim@gmail.com. DANMORHAIM@gmail. DANMORHAIM. And the book website is thebetterend.com. The better end, no dots.com. betterend.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Like I said, we have a couple questions. First question is, how often should I update my advanced directive?
You should, if you're with advanced directives, every year or two, they'll send you a little reminder to do it, but you should change it whenever your circumstances change. Obviously, when you're 25, it'll be different than when you're 45 or 65 or 85. Or if your relationships change, your spiritual values change, your health situation changes, those are times to update it. And I'll just say personally again, because I'm never reluctant about sharing personally, I had my sister-in-law in my advanced directive further down the tier than my spouse and adult children, and she died, and I hadn't updated my advanced directive. Fortunately, my directive sent me a reminder, and then I removed her from it. But situations change, so you should look at it every year or two, but if your circumstances change, that's the time to change your advanced directive. Also, your advanced directive should not be in a safety deposit box. It needs to be available, be found. So I not only have it in my wallet, my kids, my wife, my doctor, they all have copies of my advanced directive. It's nothing hidden at all. There's nothing in there that I'm, would worry about that's personal information or anything like that. There's nothing in there like that. It really just says, here's generally the kind of care that I want. Here's the people I want to be contacted. More important now with COVID, because families are not at the bedside. We used to rely on families a lot to guide us on this, even with the conflicts most of the time. In fact, they were helpful. So make it available. And then clinicians, we need to learn to honor them. That runs counter to some of what some clinicians were trained, and we need to do better with that as well.
Yeah. Can you define palliative care, Dr. Morheim?
Yeah, palliative care is any kind of supportive care. It's generally associated with advanced illness, but it doesn't have to be. So even if somebody came into the emergency room with a broken arm and I put on a cast and gave them a sling, that's palliative care too. But what it really is in this case is pain relief, comfort, good diet, and a lot of other supportive treatments that people will help them recover from whatever illness or injury it is, or if it's talking about end-of-life care. It's going to be done in coordination with hospice care.
Is it legal to be buried in a public area, a wooded area that you shared?
Where you can be buried is going to be up to a local jurisdiction. I'm not sure what's meant by public area, like a public park. No, but most places, I don't think, but most places you actually can be buried in your own backyard. And most people don't know that. That's what used to happen if you have such space and it's allowed in your local jurisdiction. Since most of us don't have that, and I don't have that in the where I live, we're more and more states have now natural burial cemeteries. They're lower cost, they're generous to the environment. And the first one in the United States came up in South Carolina, a place called Ramsey Creek. A family inherited a lot of land. They didn't want to develop it, but they had to. They want to put houses on it or shopping centers or industrial parks, but they had to pay taxes and maintenance. So they made it a natural burial cemetery, and I visited that one, and that's the pictures that you saw where that came from. So they got enough money but much lower cost than traditional funerals or cemeteries, which in cemeteries cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, usually $2,000 or $3,000. Solves the problem there, and families participate in the process, and that enabled them to keep their land looking natural. There's a couple here in Maryland that are going to be opening up, but they're scattered around. I know there's one in Pennsylvania. So they're around the United States, and you might want to take a look at those. More are coming as more people think that's a nicer way to go.
Yeah. Last question, Dr. Morheim. You had mentioned my directives. Somebody asked, where can I find the documents for advanced directives, medical power of attorney?
Well, my directives walks you through that right away. Every state has them typically available through your state attorney general or through the state health department. Hospitals typically will hand them out if you ask for them. But also AARP has excellent forms and available by state. If you live in one state 99% of the time, that you be sure you do that state. But there are people who live between two places, and you might want to complete one in each state so you have the legal form. It does come up from time to time when you're traveling. Let's say I live in Maryland, but let's say I'm driving and I go to Ohio, something happens in Ohio. Those are issues that we're still trying to work out, but I can tell you that where I work, when that happened, I'd always try to respect people's advance directives, and even if they came from another state form. My directives is not state specific, so it works pretty well. ARP forms are not necessarily state specific, so they work really well. But just the same way I would appreciate a EKG from another state or lab tests from another state, I don't discount them because they came from, Indiana. I think they're valuable, and I'll take care of them and use them appropriately.
Very good. Well, once again, thank you again, Dr. Morheim. For
Thank
those
you.
that are interested, you can find out all of our upcoming and archive webinars on knowledgeableaging.com. We also say go to YouTube, type in Knowledgeable Aging and subscribe. We update that a couple of times per month. If podcasts are your thing, you can find us on Apple Tunes, Spotify, etc. Till next time, I'm your host, Jason Kotar, and this is Knowledgeable Aging.